People of the internet, welcome to my after show. Hake, TJump, thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, what I'd like to do is let the audience members jump in if they'd like. You know what? I did not put that in the description. So I'm going to let you guys just get started on the rehashing whatever you wanted to rehash from the debate. And then I'll put that link in the description for anybody who wants to join. I'll give you guys 3 minutes of screen time, and then we'll move on to the next person unless there's nobody else in line. So, hey, TJump. One thing I wanted to do real quick is bring up one of the questions that were not answered from Gizmo Galarga. They said, TJump, do you think the COVID-19 lockdowns were the correct policy, but the execution was botched in the U.S.?
I think Hake asked me that, and I said, I don't know. I'm going to wait for further evidence to compare the results of the different governmental policies to figure out which one was correct. I don't know the answer.
Did you ever look around and think, this is kind of insane, or this is insane, or this is, I've never seen it before?
Well, so the rationale of shutdowns makes perfect sense. Like I mentioned, if we literally did just stay in our own little corners, the virus would be dead in 2 weeks, which would be very rational. I understand that people are stupid and it's not going to happen. And I think that politicians were overly ambitious in how many people they thought would actually comply, which was way more than actually did comply. And so I think that it's a hard political decision to try to establish how many people are actually going to listen to the policies, how many won't, and what effect it's going to have. And so it's a gamble. And it was the gamble that they lost.
So you think and for when it dragged on, did you think that was a good thing?
I think you probably could have inferred from the amount of people who weren't listening that it wasn't going to work, and so they probably could have shut it down slightly sooner than they did. Stopped the shutdown sooner than they did.
Yeah, because Trump was calling for people to just wash their hands 10 times as much and get back to work. He didn't like this, the fact that it was dragging and killing businesses. He lives in the real world, where people have to work and function and live. What's the background noise?
I hear somebody's TV on.
Yes, yeah, I'm playing God of War.
Oh, nice. Those what game?
God of War, Ragnarok.
That's God of War? It did not sound like God of War. It sounded like the news.
Oh, it's because they hired one of the main actors who plays a lot of political roles to play Odin, one of the main bad guys, and so he sounds just like West Wing, essentially.
That's hilarious.
I thought you were an atheist, man.
I am an atheist.
So the Great Reset is this idea that things have to change on a grand scale because in light of the COVID-19. That's how I understand it. And the book, I have not read it either. I downloaded it. I'm going to read it. We can read it together if y'all want. I don't care. But I don't understand exactly why it's such a bad thing. Like, I understand that you don't think that COVID-19 was as big of a deal as it could have been, right? But just imagine that COVID-19 was the bubonic plague. I mean, that has happened already, so we know it can happen again. So I'm just wondering, do you see any validity to these efforts to bolster our defenses against worldwide pandemic?
I would say not by the people who I'm seeing at the forefront. It's for me, it's the people who are leading this charge. And when I look at them, I see like the dishonesty and the false values that they push. It's so artificial. And TJump makes a good point that the Republicans are not much different, not really different at all. But the reality is it wasn't. Like, they definitely exploited fear, whether maliciously or innocently, in some cases. And we have a culture of fear and catering to women and their fears and all that stuff, and over cautious, over protective type of environment, because it was quite clear that it wasn't the bubonic plague. And
Sure.
I don't know that a centralized, I suppose maybe I don't know that a centralized power would be the solution to another bubonic plague. I think that they would be more likely to bring it about, with the globalization and all that stuff. Because we have stop me if I'm veering too far off from the topic, but we have these same people allow people to come into the country unchecked in America, for example, and in Europe. And we have all of this worldwide trade, which I can understand that there's some benefits to it, but that's also spreading the diseases faster than ever. And we have illegal immigration that they don't care to stop. And that's bringing in who knows what diseases. So I don't think that these people are really honest or trustworthy in stopping another bubonic plague. Does that make sense?
No.
The-
Honestly.
I
Go ahead,
think
sorry.
the question is more like, if there was a massive disease that was happening, would that justify a shutdown? If it was killing 90% of people who got it and it was spreading at the same rate as COVID, would that justify shutting stuff down?
Maybe so. And it would be done by the people, because the people can clearly see what's going on. They don't have to just trust this boogeyman because they see what's going on. I think that the locals would be able to do it fine. And the locals did this to us in many of these liberal areas that we're living in. If that makes sense.
I mean, COVID wasn't the bubonic plague, right? But certainly it was a big deal. I mean, it did overwhelm the healthcare system. Nurses were losing their minds and killing themselves and just doing all kinds of crazy stuff just to make it through their days, and that's a situation that nobody wants. Do we?
No, but they're the ones the same people who are bringing the solution to this are the ones who weakened the medical industry to where we have all these female nurses and compliant type nurses and people who don't necessarily want to get, or who comply with the flu shot, for example. The flu shot overwhelms the nurses every year, and the media tries to hype that and tells everybody to get their flu shots. And they've gotten rid of a lot of the independent thinking people who are tougher in mind and who can handle stress better than the people who remain in the medical industry.
Well, I think that's more of an issue of burnout and just overworking the people in the healthcare system. I fell victim to burnout specifically, and I went to war. I survived all that. I don't think I'm mentally weak in any kind of way, but you can get burned out when you're running 12-hour shifts 4 or 5 times a week, and things are crazy. It's life or death situations. I don't know what the biggest decisions you have to make on a day-to-day basis are, but when you're making a decision that's like, if I mess up, this dude's gonna die.
Right.
That's a big deal.
But they always say, I know nurses, and many of them say the common saying is that they're understaffed and overworked or something like that. And if they're so understaffed, they shouldn't be kicking out people who think for themselves, who don't. I know people who were nurses, men who were nurses, who left nursing and went into trucking because they didn't want to comply with the flu shot. It became mandatory during the Obama years or something like that, around that time. They've been pushing for more and more of the women and diversity stuff and all these fake values, polluting politics, polluting the medical field. So they're hamstringing medicine, and then they're coming in and saying, "Oh, we're overwhelmed," but you did it to yourselves, you know. The politics has corrupted medicine, I say.
I'll let you respond to that, TJump.
I think we should pay nurses and medical industry more, and that will encourage more people to go into the field.
What about not kicking out people who don't necessarily want to get a flu shot, for example?
I think that if, for example, getting the flu shot will prevent transmission of flu to people in a hospital, then it's probably important to get a flu shot.
So you're for the mandatory flu shot, and then kicking out a large segment of the would-be quite capable nurses and doctors who don't want to comply with that.
If the people who don't get the flu shot have a higher rate of transmitting the flu to people who are in the hospital and it ends up killing people, then we implement like a policy to force people to get the flu shot to save lives. If someone says no, then yeah, you should probably fire them if it's been proven to save lives.
Have you looked into that it has been? Because you're putting in a lot of ifs in there.
No, I don't. It doesn't interest me all that much. I would, if like there's evidence that getting the flu shot saves lives, then implementing a policy like that makes sense. If there is no evidence that it saves lives, then it would be irrational.
Yeah. I think it's another example of that overprotective stuff. I'm speaking obviously ignorantly in that I don't know the studies or the numbers, but to me, it strikes me as hype again. Like we see all this hype with the politicians and the media and these nurses who talk to the media.
I would be willing to bet money that it probably does save lives.
To me, you're at what cost though? Because you're saving lives on one end and then hamstringing the medical field in the other.
Is there any cost that's too high to save lives?
Because you're also costing lives. Because do you understand what I'm saying? You're also costing lives because you're taking out people who could be saving lives.
Yeah, so like if you fired more nurses, then and so there are like 0 nurses and everyone dies because they get no treatment or something, then yeah, It would make sense to get rid of a policy that caused literally all nurses or enough nurses to quit to diminish the quality of service for the majority of people.
Yeah. They're doing the same thing with the police and the military. They're getting rid of or they were anyway, the unvaccinated, getting rid of the people who think for themselves or who are more independent thinking, for example, or not so compliant. I know cops or would-be LAPD officers who were upstanding young men, but they think a little bit differently from what the norm is. And so they're hamstringing the police because of politics, kissing up to like the mainstream political correctness. So I think I see the medical industry as the same, corrupt.
I don't know where you're getting that from though.
You haven't seen you haven't heard of like the flu shots being more mandatory now than before?
No, I have not.
Okay, well, that's what I've heard, and I have heard of many cases where like people who don't want to take the vax are getting fired or let go or locked out, and it's not just the vax; it's like views and politics and all kinds of stuff that they're pushing for.
I mean, if we had
go ahead,
if we had a guy that was trying to champion MAPs, pedophiles, if he was trying to champion that cause, right, we would all almost ubiquitously reject that kind of call to action, right? And you could make the same kind of arguments, like, oh, they're being pushed out of society, they're all this other stuff. I mean, if something is bad, then society has a right to push it out, doesn't it?
Right, but they're pushing out the good people.
Well, I mean, if you're a person who can get a vaccination, doesn't want to get a vaccination, but your non-vaccinated status can compromise the lives of the people you're supposed to take care of, doesn't that make you a bad person?
No, it doesn't, because you have a right to your. I mean, I guess you don't get to work there. You get to work someplace else or start your own business. But I don't buy that notion that it's that necessary. I don't buy it. And the same thing, like with the cop example. Like the cop example had nothing to do with anything related to practical saving lives or anything else. It was just pure politics and PR stuff. And they're doing the same thing in the medical industry. They're pushing for women and minorities and all that stuff in the college level and all that stuff. So it's not oriented towards excellence and towards serving the people. It's towards control. And for some reason, like, I understand that you guys are falling for, but if they get vaccinated, it'll save lives. They could potentially, if they're sick and whatever, and don't know it or whatever, can kill somebody or some people. But to me, that's like an overprotective thing. That's like I don't know. It's like a test of compliance rather than independence.
So Hake is actually kind of right about that there is a play politically for anti-egalitarian, anti-meritocracy, and I think that's economically a bad strategy. I think we should advocate for meritocratic economic systems rather than like diversity hires or non-merit-based immigration, those kind of things. So I'm for merit-based jobs and immigration.
All right. So other than the COVID issue, what else do we know about this Great Reset idea that you are for or against, for either of you?
Now they're pushing the climate thing as the next excuse to climate shutdowns. Well, I say now, but before in 2020, before the COVID shutdowns were over, there were people pushing for climate shutdowns. So to me, in my perception, they're jumping from one emergency to the next to keep people compliant, scared, controllable, and to push power.
So they get us into this state of compliance, and then what? They just milk us for money that they give us?
Well, they push more and more in terms of encroaching into our lives, because I still say that these shutdowns were unprecedented. I think that it's undeniable. I could be mistaken, but
yeah, they're definitely unprecedented.
In American history, but not in the world, no. Like during the bubonic plague, as you mentioned, there were equivalently big shutdowns.
And isn't it funny that like the pampered public fell for like a bubonic plague level shutdown for something that wasn't as serious as they were pretending or fear mongering about?
Well,
I mean, we didn't even have a national
people
shutdown.
died, so it was pretty serious.
It was pretty serious, but it wasn't as serious as they were saying. There were a lot of perverse incentives for hyping it as more serious than it was on every level. And I get that there were some serious suffering, but this was not necessary. I argue that it was not necessary. Or I assert there.
The thing that I hear a lot about is that we were supposed to have 2 weeks and then it was supposed to go away, right? But that 2 weeks never started. And if it did, I'd like somebody to tell me what date it started on, because Trump didn't do a national lockdown. We had certain states that did lockdowns, but it wasn't even as draconian as it could have, or maybe even should have been. And you have from what I saw, people just going around living their daily lives as normal throughout the entire thing. When did we ever have a true 2-week stop of everything?
Well, I know this isn't answering your question, but Trump did that thing on March 13th or 20th or whenever it was. And you're right, it wasn't draconian. It wasn't, I don't even think Trump had the power nor the desire to force that. I don't even think that it's honestly in the Constitution for the federal government to force that kind of thing, unless they could pretend that it was, that level of a threat, which it wasn't obvious to anybody that it was or wasn't. So it was mostly like the more liberal towns that were shut down, which is the cities. And yet those were the ones that were spreading maybe the most, because there's a lot of low information people who don't watch the news, don't pay attention, don't comply. And it's not just the conservatives. I'm talking about a lot of people just don't pay attention to this stuff. They don't care or know. They think, oh, it's fine. And that's how a lot of people are. And they're kind of encouraged and enabled to be that way, not pay much attention to what's going on.
Okay, but you agree there was never a national.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was never a what TJump described as everybody stays separate from everybody.
Right. So without that, we couldn't expect any kind of lockdowns to really be that effective, could we? If people still have the choice to go around and do whatever they want, choose to mask, not mask up, then we can't hold the lockdown itself accountable for the decisions of the people involved, can we?
No, but I don't care that it spread, because you can't stop it from spreading. Just because common sense could have predicted that it would have gone the way that it went. The lockdown would have gone the way it went. A lot of people won't comply, whether by defiance or just pure don't know what's going on, don't care. And then I forget what the and then part was, but it was quite predictable. My concern about the lockdowns was how destructive it was to the economy. That part was also quite predictable, how destructive it was to people's businesses and livelihoods, and also sense of well-being and the addictions and suicide. I think addictions and suicides went up, not just in the medical field because of the stress of dealing with this stuff, but the isolation and staying indoors, not being in the sun, not exercising, and all that stuff. That was.
I mean, I looked at those numbers and it wasn't that bad, in my opinion. But
okay, well,
I guess it's subjective.
Yeah, I don't know, but I don't think that it was a good thing at all. People gained the COVID 10 pounds or whatever. That's not good for health.
Oh well, I'm gonna lose 10 pounds in the one good shit.
But anyway, overall, I think there was a Revolver News did the thing about life years lost, had a big report about life years lost, which is something that I didn't totally understand, but there's a lot of costs to life and livelihood and quality of life and finance and economy and practical life that was done. It was like a destructive thing on the whole, I say.
Well, I don't know about you, Hake, but I believe in democracy. I heard your exchange earlier, you and TJump, and
right.
It sounded like you might not believe in democracy that much. But personally, I think that the power should belong with the people, but
not the majority. Not the majority over the minority. That's why I say democracy, because democracy is the majority rules, and to hell with the minority. But there's like a republic has protections for the minority. That's what my beef was with democracy.
Isn't that inevitable though? There will always be a minority of some kind that needs to be, quote unquote, ruled. Like the pedophile community is a minority community that needs to be controlled, right?
Yeah.
So
Right,
I mean,
but
it's
that's
not
not-
inherently bad that the majority rules the minority always. It's when they oppress the minority. Isn't that more accurate?
Yeah, but with a democracy, it's like inevitable because human nature is basically evil and selfish and stupid and
Well, whose fault is that?
human nature. And so I don't think that like we don't live in a democracy. We're going more towards a democracy because people think, oh, the majority this and the majority that, and they're not thinking ahead to like, but the majority is wrong a lot, and so you want what we set up in America, or the founders set up, was a representative republic, or whatever you call it. I don't remember what the phrasing is.
Republican democracy, I call it.
Maybe so. But the point is, like, you don't want majority rule because the majority is going to vote away their rights and be bribed away from their freedoms.
Which would then lead to minority rule.
Yeah, minority rule by the people that whom the useful idiots vote in.
So instead of majority rule, what should we have?
We should have the republic thing, I think, and it should be we should. I suppose we should have the republic, go back to the republic thing that we had before.
And would that also be called minority rule?
No, but it's definitely not mob rule.
How is so a republic being like a representative republic with the electoral college means that less people get more of a vote, and so minority rules because there's less people.
Sure, I suppose so. They get disproportionate say to protect them. Yeah. You're not fine with that?
The case?
Go ahead.
I mean, it's either the case that it's a minority rule or a majority rule or no rule whatsoever, right? Those are the only options. I mean, a king is the ultimate minority, a single.
Yeah.
Is that what you want? A king?
No, I just said republic thing. The republic thing.
I want to be king.
I mean, I think that the republic was a good idea, and then we should have like more control over who's allowed into the country, who's allowed to vote, and stuff like that. Because we didn't. I mean, the voting populace is not as high quality as it once was, I would say.
Well, there's nothing we can do about that necessarily.
I know.
I mean, I don't want to dispute that necessarily either. But we have a republic, right? We have different independent states that are federated together into this larger thing, and they are allowed to send their representatives to vote on the larger issues, and that's what a republic is, right?
Yeah, I think that we lost a lot of rights with the so-called Civil War. Like, the southern states that seceded. That's a right of self-determination, right? They literally voted, I think, to secede from the Union, and which is in the Constitution, regardless of the slavery issue. And the North said, no, we don't want you to secede. We're going to fight to make you stay. And so they no longer had that self-determination. And then there was the federal government then got disproportionately strengthened to the detriment.
I think there's a large group of people who were not being allowed to, self-determine, which is kind of the point of that whole Civil War thing, was to allow for more self-determination of that particular group of people.
I don't know that was entirely the point. That may have been I'm sure that was a big part of it, but
I think it was like the first line of the Emancipation Proclamation, or what was the document Abraham Lincoln signed specifically to start the Civil War. It was kind of there.
I know, but that's like PR stuff. But the point is, irregardless, which is not a word. Regardless, the federal government exploited that crisis for a major power grab over the states' rights, which was, I say, still detrimental, notwithstanding slavery, which I think is a little melodramatized too anyway, but that's sort of beside the point.
Are there any examples of states vying for increases in states' rights that you would consider moral?
With
I don't think there are any
states' rights that are moral. I think that
it seems like every time the states wants to go fight for their rights, they're always trying to do it for something pretty messed up,
such as
slavery.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't agree there. Like representation, what was it? Taxation without representation. There can be justified reasons for states' rights to advocate for their rights.
I mean, any examples of the states actually taking legislation or cases to the courts or some in American history where we've actually tried to increase the states' individual rights as opposed to the federal rights.
Can you think of another one besides, since you don't agree about slavery? Can you think of another issue where the states had wanted states' rights and it was messed up?
Oh, the Texas electrical system in Texas is totally screwed up. That's a good example. But there are examples of states' rights doing things that were more moral than what is required by the government, and so it's not all bad, but there are lots of bad examples as well.
Yeah, and the feds, and I don't buy that. Are you really free if you can't own a slave? Like
The slave is free.
I know that the slave is not free, and it's not a pleasant situation usually for the slave, but I say as slavery goes, I don't think that American slavery was the worst of the slavery systems or the slavery reality experience.
Anything can always be worse.
Yeah, but I mean,
yeah, like the Barbary slave trade, the men were castrated, so right. I kind of agree, but I don't think that's the fact that it wasn't literally the worst form of slavery doesn't mean it's okay.
Like minimum wage, we have federal minimum wage, we have state minimum wage, and that's interfering with people's right to contract and make deals with one another. And it's literally like shutting down potential businesses or opportunity costs for businesses and work and self. I don't know. It's good for you to work, right? Even if it's for a small amount, and it's artificially inflating the cost of money. So there's the federal government is the most. I say that the federal government can get away with the most corruption, far above what the local governments, the federal police, the FBI lies to us, but it's a crime for us to lie to the FBI. But the FBI lies to us all the time. When local cops lie to us, hopefully we catch them and they're held accountable. Who holds the federal government accountable?
Well, that would be the IRS, but they're pretty underfunded thanks to the Republicans.
Wait, what did you say about the IRS?
The IRS is the ones who would hold the federal government accountable, but they can't because they don't have any money.
And who's holding the IRS accountable? Aren't they the ones who were allegedly persecuting the Tea Party and voter integrity over there during the Obama administration, or maybe to this day?
No, the IRS is underfunded. They don't have enough people to do anything.
I know, but they were disproportionately auditing during the Obama years. The Tea Party. It was this Tea Party targeting scandal, and voter integrity. Interestingly enough.
Well, again, they don't have enough people to do any significant auditing of anybody. Like they should be auditing the Department of Defense. They should be auditing the corporations. They should be auditing
rather than the people,
the
right?
DNC. Mm-hmm. Yes, but they don't. They literally don't have enough funding to do that. So we should fund the IRS so they can actually audit the larger military organizations and larger financial organizations to actually be able to hold the government accountable.
But maybe we should just, I mean, I would love for us to like not have a Department of Education and some of these centralized federal governments that can be so corrupt. Like who's going to watch the IRS? Who's going to audit the IRS?
Well, I mean, what audit them? Literally, all the IRS does is make sure that you paid your bills. So, I mean, like, you don't need like the people who oversight them would be Congress.
Oh man, I don't have high hopes for the country.
Which in an ideal situation would mean us.
Yeah. And Congress kind of is a reflection of us. As unpopular as they are, they're every bit as stupid and pathetic and weak and
I agree.
evil as
I
most
agree.
of
We
us.
can all agree to that. Was it George Carlin who said garbage in, garbage out?
Yeah.
My favorite quote. All right. Well, I think this has been a fun little conversation. I think we were ready to wrap it up. What do you guys think?
Sounds good.
Yeah. I appreciate talking to you guys.
No, I appreciate you guys stopping by. Thank you guys so much. And thank you to everybody in the chat, everybody who stopped by to watch. And just want to let you guys know that I have a show coming up on the 27th. I am hosting a debate between Matt Dillahunty and William Albright. They're going to be debating Mariology. Is it reasonable? So that's going to be on the 27th at 9 Eastern, 8 Central. And that's going to be here on Atheist Edge. So check that out. Subscribe if you want to check that out. And thank you all so much for joining me again. And what do I say? Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm not going to say it this time. Wait a minute.
Mariology.
Sorry.
The
Here you go.
Mariology, for those who don't know, the part of Christian theology dealing with the Virgin Mary.
Right. And there's a episode of Matt's Atheist Debates that's linked in the description of that video that you guys can learn more about that on. So just want to say...
bridges we build, not the bridges we burn, to give us the edge.